Welcome back to the Outlet Podcast with Gabe and Eric. I'm Gabe.
And I'm Eric. All right, so I'm going to start with a question for you, Gabe.
Going right in.
So on a previous podcast, you mentioned that sort of the more atheist countries, like the Soviet Union or China, had at a higher rate of mass murder. And I wanted to sort of hear your general take on whether the religiosity of a society has any correlation with the morality of that society.
Okay, it's a complicated issue.
Definitely.
Right? So let's consider the communist countries, like China when it was communist, and the Soviet Union.
Still communist, by the way.
So well, yeah, still,
but not
communist,
Maoist anymore. Yeah.
not Maoist, not extreme
Yeah,
Maoist.
yeah.
Right? But so under Article 52 in the Code of Law, whatever in the Soviet Union, they had a law that said there's no public gathering at all of any places, because they had this fear that if people were going to publicly gather together, they were going to conspire together and somehow, pose a threat to the Communist Party.
Yeah, undermine the union. Yeah.
Yep. And so what that did is it completely outlawed religion at the same time, because religion is a public gathering of peoples.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was completely opposed to religion. It outlawed religion. Although there are some indications that religion in those communist parties was also used as a controlling factor over the people too, but it wasn't as significant as them just outlawing it outright. And then in China today, the religions in China are completely controlled by the Communist Party as well. And so what I'm getting at is there's been a lot of deaths attributed to when a society completely outlaws people having God in their society.
Yeah.
And also on the flip side, when you have a country that is, a theocratic society where God is the center of the society, there also is a number of people who are willing to go to the extremes of their religion, right? Yeah. And, Oman and Somalia are good examples, right? Like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So it's complicated to say, if you have a society that doesn't have religion, does it kill more people than a society that does have religion? I don't know, because throughout history, there's been a lot of, religious wars where entire wars were fought because one people are Gentiles, one people are Jews. So
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that what you're latching on to here is not necessarily the religiosity, that's a hard word, of a society, but more the level of authoritarianism in that society, right? Because we can agree that Saudi Arabia and Iran are theocracies, right? The both Sunni and Wahhabism, or Shiism in Iran's case and Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia's case, are a fundamental part of the government, right? And the clergy is a part of the government essentially, and the religion is put forth in order to prop up and support the regime, right? But also, if you look at the Soviet Union and China, those are also extremely authoritarian countries, right? Where religion was persecuted and in many cases outright banned in order to prop up the regime and prevent collapse.
So let me try and make a connection real quick.
Yeah.
So when I say that, Communist Party outlawed religion and that's why all those people died, what I really do mean is when you take away the cornerstone of a building, it falls down. And the cornerstone of the building of all societies, right, are based on a religious ideas, whether that be the Judeo-Christian ethics of the, commandments, or some, Muslim pillar that they must follow in the society, right? And so that is one of the ways that it's not implicitly, but explicitly shared among the people that people should act this way, right? And that's the religion that unifies all the people.
Yeah.
And Friedrich Nietzsche talked about this when he famously proclaimed that God is dead.
We killed him.
We killed him.
Yeah.
Yep. Is that when people leave God, there's going to be a significant death. He proclaimed that.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of foresight of him too, because just after, no, I shouldn't say just after, but after he died, there were 40 to 60 million people that died in Russia, and 60, 80 in China or whatever. So yeah, he basically said when you remove all the ideals that people act to, that God figure, then there's going to be mass deaths, because they're just going to be completely shaken up and have no idea what to believe. Not to, you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I understand broadly, but I'll go into the Soviet Union in a bit, but I'll talk specifically about Mao's persecution of religion, quote unquote, and Mao's persecution was not against any long-held beliefs or any established religion, right? Confucianism basically fulfilled that niche within China as a social and political doctrine that people followed, and it still remained very much a part of China under Mao. Not explicitly, obviously. Mao, took it and basically co-opted it and painted it red and called it Maoism. But the practices that he was targeting were basically superstitions, right? Old folklore beliefs that had carried on into the mid 20th century. Things like, if you burn money at your ancestors' graves, they'll get that money in the afterlife, right? Mao wanted to put a stop on that because burning money is economically not productive, right? Or things like, if the more pain an animal's in when it's dying, the better it will taste, right? That's a traditional Chinese folklore beliefs. He wanted to put a stop on that, right? Just because he wanted to bring China into the 20th century and catch up with the other developed countries. And in order to do that, he felt like he had to modernize the beliefs of Chinese people, so he clamped down on superstition, basically, and more folk belief, right?
Sure,
Folk traditions where this specific mountain has these powers, and if you go up and do this certain thing, you will get some reward, right? It was not necessarily undercutting the underlying moral doctrine of China, because that very much remained
Confucius.
Confucius, and under Maoist, right, where your sole purpose is to continue to fight for the revolution, support your leader, and live the way a good Chinese communist should live, right?
Well, I also thought that, because we could say that those folklores are part of Chinese history, and I thought that Mao was trying to push aside Chinese history and more focus on the development of the society today, and somewhat of forgetting the past.
Yeah, I mean that was very much a part of Maoism, is that to sort of push aside the old to make room for the new, right? And if you look at the background of China before Maoism, right, it was basically a shattered country with warlords controlling their own territory, right? There was technically a national government, but it actually only controlled about 40% of the country, and that 40% was still run by corrupt warlords and aristocrats that ran their plot of land for their own personal gain, right? There was lots of famine, lots of death, lots of infighting, civil war, right? And then the Japanese came in and screwed everything up. I say that lightly, right? They massacred, tons of Chinese people,
Manchuria.
And China's economy as a whole had not caught up to the rest of the world, right?
Yeah, it wasn't until like 1990 when it became globalized.
Right? Yeah, well, that was under Deng Xiaoping, and I can go over that in a little bit. Later, but yeah, I mean, basically Mao saw the problems that China was facing and wanted to remedy them, and he felt that the best way to do that was to copy the structure of the imperial government, right? Mao famously had a book that was written by a Chinese historian that was basically chronicling all the past rulers of China and the strategies they used to hold on to power in China and to basically ride this massive beast that is Chinese civilization, and he cited that a lot, right? He referred back to that. So he recognized that in order to rule China, you need to look backwards for guidance, right? Because there have been established strategies and doctrines that have been proven effective, right? But in terms of the economy or the beliefs of the people, we need to push forward, right? We need to leave all of that in the past, push forward to a new communist country, right? That leaves the strife and the chaos in the past, right? And in a lot of ways he did mess up, right? But my basic, and I can go into those mistakes pretty
Sure.
in a bit, but as a whole, I feel like without Mao's foundation, right, of a strong communist party who has control over the direction of the economy and the society as a whole, we would not have the China that we have today, right? And I think that China is an incredibly successful China, and in terms of specifically looking at the metric of lifting people out of poverty and modernizing the economy, it has been the most successful nation in the world at that. I mean, to give you give you one little fact, since 1949, when the communists won the revolution, 80% of the world population that has been lifted above the poverty line, as determined by the UN, has been in China, right? And a lot of experts say that without that rise in the standard of living in China, the world might have actually shifted backwards in terms of the overall standard of living of the people as a whole. Right?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also important to mention that one reason for his rapid economic growth was of course, the very strict, very tough communist plans, right? Of making people overproduce agriculture and then take all of it or whatever. Communist plans, right?
Yeah.
And so I think when you have that rapid economic growth, there's always something that gets left behind, and that was the Chinese people themselves, right? Because 60 to 8 million died of them as a result of increased industry and increased agriculture.
Yeah. So I'll go into that a little specifically, right? So there are two big glaring causes of death under Mao in China, right? The first was the collectivization of agriculture, right? So instead of having individually owned family farms, Mao collectivized that agriculture and put everybody together onto these large communes where they would farm a large amount of land together as a commune, right? And that significantly decreased the agricultural productivity of China because it's essentially not as effective at creating food, right? That program disincentivized individual people to work as hard as they can on the farm, and instead rewarded minimal effort, basically.
Yeah.
As well as it was compounded by a large, basically a crop disease, right, where a bunch of bacteria or something. I'm not an expert, right? But infected the crops,
sure.
Right, and destroyed a large amount of the rice production for a couple of years, and that basically led to mass starvation, right? And I think it's important to draw a distinction between the sort of mass murder that happened under the Nazi regime, a famous regime that loved to murder people, right? Where people were being shipped to camps for the purpose of killing them, right? As opposed to a society where there is mass famine and a bureaucratic decision resulted in a decrease in agricultural productivity, which led to decreased food production and caused people to starve, right? I think that there is an important distinction to draw there. Obviously, they're both mistakes, and they both caused deaths, but one was done maliciously, right? And the other was done for the hope of a better future, and it turned out not to work out, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know. When you put it like that, it almost sounds like you're kind of justifying the deaths, which I know you aren't.
Yeah.
But I don't know. When you have a change of economic systems, people are going to die, right? That's just how it's been.
Well, not necessarily, right? There have been smooth transitions from agriculture to industrial societies, right? I mean, there are always side effects, right? And I'd like to talk about the next transition of the Chinese economy,
okay.
Right? And that was after Mao's death. There was a group called the Gang of Four, right, which is Mao's wife and a couple of other high up party cadres that ran the country for about half a decade, right? And they did so pretty badly, right? They basically tried to continue on the path of Maoism, and upholding Mao as a sort of sun god, right? But then after that came in a man named Deng Xiaoping, right? Who is one of my all-time favorite Chinese leaders, right? And he basically saw that China's economy was underdeveloped, and that in order to catch up to the rest of the world and improve the standard of living for the Chinese people, they needed to industrialize. Right.
Yep.
So what Deng Xiaoping did was he started a policy called the open door policy. Right. So before Deng Xiaoping, under Mao, the country was basically completely cut off. Right. The only people that could leave the country were diplomats and people that worked for the government. The only people that could come into the country were commissars from the Soviet Union and other allies, but no foreign industrialists, no foreign companies, nothing like that. Right.
Yep.
But Deng Xiaoping started a program where I think it was like something like 7 coastal cities would experiment with small-scale capitalism, right? Cities like Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Tianjin, cities that are now booming economic centers and some of the most productive economic cities in the world. And he basically allowed small-scale capitalism, right? Allowing foreign companies to come in and build factories there, which would basically increase the productivity of the average Chinese worker, right? Because
Sure.
as pretty much a statement of fact, industrial jobs are more productive than agricultural jobs. You produce more GDP per capita working in a factory than you do on a farm, right? And obviously both of them are necessities for a modern economy, but China saw that it was too heavily reliant on agricultural labor and not enough on industrial labor. So they started this small scale project by allowing foreign industrialists to come to China and build factories in these cities, and that started in the late 70s, early 80s, and basically Deng Xiaoping made sure that they made quantitative, technocratic decisions, basically putting ideology aside and making decisions that would purely benefit the GDP per capita and the productivity of the Chinese labor, right?
Yeah.
And that economic boom that resulted, right? It resulted in, everything famously being made in China, right? And that productivity went back to the Chinese workers, and they received significantly more pay working in a factory than they did back on the farm, and so there was a massive migration from the rural countryside to the big cities, where people could find more productive jobs, and that massive shift of labor was one of the biggest causes of the massive economic growth that China has experienced over the past 40 years.
Yeah, it's growing. Its GDP is growing substantially every single year.
Yeah, I mean it's now slowed down a little bit because that process has sort of slowed down. All of the agricultural labor has pretty much been tapped out, and there's that process of migration from the rural countryside to an urban city has slowed down significantly. But that's one of the biggest factors in the economic boom that China has experienced over the past 40 years. And
it can be related to adopting capitalist practices.
Well, quasi-capitalist, right? So they allowed foreign companies to come in and build factories, right? But at the same time, all of the state banks are state controlled to this day, right? So that means all of those savings that the Chinese people are accumulating from working in these new productive factories are controlled by the state, right? And these banks do function as regular banks. They give housing loans, they give regular old loans to businesses and stuff, but it is under the purview of the state, right? So that means when the Chinese state says, listen, we want to develop AI, right? We want more AI technology or electric cars or anything that the CCP determines as necessary for the future of the Chinese economy. They basically have the capital to do so, right? And so as foreign industrialists were coming to China and building these factories, the money that they were paying as wages to the laborers, to the workers, got co-opted by the CCP and put into new industrial projects, right?
Okay.
And so now they're slowly transitioning all that money from being in the pockets. I mean, they didn't take that money, right? The same way a bank doesn't actually take your money when it gives out a loan. It just gives out a loan with that money in hopes that you keep your money in the bank so that it can be repaid, right?
With interest.
Yeah, with interest, of course. And yeah, basically took all that money and started up Chinese industry, right? So now there's Chinese-owned industry owned by private entrepreneurs, but to call these entrepreneurs independent would be lying, right? Because
Yeah, because they're still connected to the Communist Party.
and they're indebted to the Communist Party,
Yep.
right? Because the Communist Party gave you that seed money to start your company, so basically that company is under the purview of the Communist Party, right? So if you look
That's
at
really interesting.
if you look at any big Chinese company, Huawei, Alibaba, any of these large international conglomerates, they, at the end of the day, they do fall under the authority of the Communist Party, right? So they allow for private entrepreneurship and they allow for private innovation, but if it comes down to brass tacks and they need something from that company, or they need that company to stop doing something,
We'll take it.
they can enforce that, basically.
Huh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I mean, it seemed to work pretty well for them.
It has worked extremely well. I mean, I've been in China a couple times now, and when I was 8, it was Beijing was mostly 3-story buildings, a lot of slums. Pretty much all the cars were taxis, because the only people that could afford cars were people that drove taxis. And then when I went 9 years later, it was a modern industrial city where it was covered in skyscrapers. There were tons of shops. The Chinese middle class had boomed. People were living middle class lives. I lived with a family there, and they were just worried about sending their kids to school and
Sure.
working their jobs and moving up the career ladder. And it has moved into the global economy incredibly well. And
Yeah, definitely.
it's
And I think
now-
Confucianism has a very large role to play with the obedience to the CCP and the hardworking laborers as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I should give a stipulation that to credit the CCP for all of this economic growth. Now, obviously, they're the biggest factor, right? And they were the ones that engineered and orchestrated that growth. But at the end of the day, it was done on the backs of hardworking Chinese workers who, ground out 14-hour shifts in an iPhone factory.
Yeah.
Just living under horrible conditions, that led to the China that we have now.
Yeah, well, I don't know, man. I value having the freedom to choose over the obedience of a society together. I feel like you can't have both.
Yeah, I mean,
Because because you attributed the economic growth to those guys who were slaving away in iPhone factories for 14 hours, right?
Yeah.
And then, bringing money to China and it getting distributed. And raising the middle class so that they can buy and purchase items in China, right? Because if you raise a lower class to the middle class, then consumerism grows, right?
Yeah.
So it almost seems like in order for a communist society to be economically stable and to have economic growth without stagnating, it has to adapt capitalist ideas in its trade and in its factory building, and the government almost has to take this not hands-off approach, because it's not like you mentioned earlier, but a lot looser approach than they would on, say, agriculture, right? Or you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I totally understand.
Because otherwise, you just have a country where it can only focus on its industry and selling its stuff only to the people of the society, and not exporting it and not bringing new things in.
Yeah.
Because then that would be capitalism at that point.
Yeah. Well, so to sort of
It's not a very good point. But
no, but to sort of bring up an example that shows that there can be incredible economic growth under a centrally planned economy. And now I'm not going to be defending the Soviet Union, right? Obviously, it was a bad authoritarian dictatorship that I don't think should be replicated in any sort of way. However, if you look at Tsarist Russia, it was an agriculture society that wasn't able to sustain a war with Austria and Hungary, right? Which was also a pretty backwards monarchy, right?
Yeah.
Both
Yeah.
pretty low countries on the economic scale, and Tsarist Russia was incredibly agricultural with almost no industry at all. And then under the Soviet Union and Stalin's 5-year plans, they were able to become the second most powerful country in the world industrially, right? Now, they never quite lived up to America, right? And there are a lot of reasons for that, mostly because they had almost no agricultural capacity other than in the Ukraine. but they were able to industrialize incredibly quickly, right? They in almost 10 years they shifted from a completely agricultural society with almost no industry at all to the second most powerful industrial country in the world, right? And that was done under the purview of the Soviet Politburo, and these hard 5-year plans. Now, obviously, it didn't play out in the end.
No,
right?
no, definitely.
It didn't work out. They
Yeah,
weren't
it
able to sustain that massive level of industrial growth, and you can cite a lot of things for that. But I think that to say that in order to have economic growth, you need to have capitalism, basically,
Sure.
to some extent, is kind of not true, right? Because the Soviet Union was able to do so, grow industrially so incredibly quickly, and I don't have a lot of facts to cite.
Yeah, well, I think what we're really
case.
getting at is the idea that you got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet, right? And I actually hate that saying, and I think it's intrinsically evil because you shouldn't crack any eggs to make any omelets.
Keep those eggs safe. Leave them in the box.
Yeah, because we talk about the economic development of these societies, and we talk about how well they're doing now, but the reason why they're doing well is because of these super harsh and tyrannical standards that had to have been met by the people. And if they weren't met, then, they starved or they got sent to the gulags. Right? I think, I don't think that it's feasible in our society in America or, throughout the world that this should happen again. That the government should take total control of all ownership of all businesses.
Yeah.
And that when they do, it'll be better off for the society in the future. Because when that happens, there's all sorts of problems when that happens. The government sucks at figuring out what resources need to go to where at what time.
Yeah, and I'm not advocating for that. But
No, I know you're not.
Yeah,
I know you're not.
But I think that in the specific case of an agricultural society that is behind the rest of the world in terms of economic development, having more state control can lead to more rapid industrial growth, right?
Yeah, I'll say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know. It's complicated.
Yeah, but so to sort of bring up an earlier topic that you brought up, which is comparing the Chinese system of obedience as opposed to the Western system of individual freedom, right? I think that China really is an anomaly when it comes to its doctrine, right? The Chinese, Confucian doctrine cannot be applied universally, right?
No, I don't think it can.
But it can be applied in China, right? Specifically because the Chinese people have been raised in a Confucian society, right? When you go to a Chinese school, you are implanted with Confucian ideals, right? Just the way the classroom is set up is structured to make you an obedient robot, basically, that is able to do one metric, right? To crank out homework and do well on tests extremely well, but not to step outside of those boundaries, right?
You could say it's only for the industrial side of your brain and not the creative side.
Yeah. And I think that it really is a system that can only be applied to China because of the beliefs of the Chinese people. And it cannot be broadly applied to a country like America because Americans have an immediate aversion to state control and any sort of institution curtailing their individualism.
Yeah, we've been taught, too, during the McCarthy era that anyone who claims to kind of collectivize anything, whatever, is communist. And communist is this evil word in America.
Yeah.
And, it is swept under the rug.
Right? Yeah. I don't know. You wanna go back to how we got started?
Yeah,
originally?
how we got started on this? Religion?
Religiosity. Yeah. So I think that. Obviously, you have to look at the individual religion of a society, right? Obviously, a Protestant society is going to be a little bit different than a Catholic society, and a Taoist society is going to be different from a Shinto society. But all in all, I think that a society with little to no religion, if it is chosen by the people themselves, can be just as successful, if not more successful, than a society that is overtly religious as a whole.
Yeah, well, one thing to say about that is, religion has always said, well, I shouldn't say always, but most religions had the idea that don't seek the things of the world, the worldly pleasures of the world, but instead seek the rewards in some sort of afterlife, right? You know, the Buddhists have that principle, which is this world is suffering and that we need to reach some sort of, forget the word. Nirvana. And Catholics too, it's like, you know, don't seek the pleasures of the world, seek the rewards in heaven. And so you could make an argument that the peoples who are religious end up not looking to sustain and develop the nation, because when we say develop, we usually mean have better satisfaction throughout the people, and instead are focusing more on their religion. And you could say that it's somewhat stagnated the pleasures of the society, right? But then kind of a counterpoint to that would be you need the religion in order to give a unifying belief that, for instance, do unto others what you would like to be done unto yourself. And if you don't have that principle in the first place, then the society can't function. Yeah. Right? I don't know. What do you think about that?
But I mean, I think that sort of a broad moral doctrine across a society doesn't have to be necessarily religious. And I'll bring up my favorite juxtaposition here is Sweden, right? Sweden is an incredibly atheistic country, right? I think only 10% of the population practices religion on a regular basis. I mean, everybody goes to church on Christmas and goes to church on Easter, right? But that's because it's more of a cultural tradition, right? That's just what you do as a Swede, but not because you believe in God. And I think that sort of the hole that lack of Christianity has been filled with is sort of an overarching moral doctrine that I can't put into words very well, because
but it's a religious idea still, that underlying moral doctrine.
Yeah, I mean quasi-religious, but I think that having a non-concrete moral doctrine, right? Something that is decided upon by the society, right? I mean, do unto others as you would have do unto you is a very prominent facet of Swedish society. I mean, that's why one of the reasons why Sweden has such a strong welfare state, right, is because Swedish people believe that we should help those that aren't doing well, because I know that if I wasn't doing well, I would want others to help me, right? Sweden has an incredibly strong welfare state, right?
Sure.
And you know, if you are down and out in Sweden, you are much more likely to be helped by the government and the people as a whole than you would, you know, here in America, which has a much higher rate of religiosity. But I think that the important thing to consider when considering the overarching moral doctrine of a society is if it's religious, it's concrete, and it really is a doctrine that cannot be changed, right? Yeah. As you've said many times, you know, the Catholic doctrine has been in place for 2,000 years, and by changing that, you undermine the stability of the church, and you undermine Catholicism as a whole, right?
Sure.
But by having a non-concrete doctrine that is sort of decided upon by the people in the society, that means it can shift and it can change, right? So if an intellectual, right, take a feminist, for example, preaches the ideals of feminism, right, that women should be equal to men and that we should strive to make our institutions reflect that ideal, if enough people in a society believe that, then that change will take in place, right? And it sort of allows for that sort of flexibility within the overall social moral doctrine, right? Because it's not written in a book, it's not, you know, written on a stone tablet. It can change and it can be shifted by the changing moral currents of that society, right?
Yep.
Which sort of allows for more flexibility and you know, basically change in a good way, because it's not going to be top-down authoritarian change, right? If the head of the, you know, Social Democratic Party in Sweden, you know, says that we need to, I don't know, curtail the rights of homeowners, right? Make all private homes public homes, and, you know, allotted by a central committee in the government, unless a majority of Swedish society believes in that belief as well and sort of converts to that ideology, it's not going to happen, right?
Sure.
No individual can sort of change the overall social doctrine unless everybody agrees with it, right?
Yeah.
So it creates it's more democratizing, right? So this social doctrine is more democratic, right? And that when a competing idea enters that space, then it can be decided upon, it can be debated, and if a majority of the people believe that idea, then the overall doctrine can change to reflect that new ideal.
Yeah, well, and to make my point clear, at the when you on a previous podcast, I said doctrine cannot change. It's true, doctrine cannot change, but the way that doctrine is implemented can change, right? So that's why we have councils in the Catholic Church. Is when a council is called, it's for a specific purpose. That this is a problem. We need to call a council and solve this problem and talk about the modern implications of how we're going to, use this in our society. So it's not necessarily that doctrine. I'm treading on thin ice right now because I don't want to say anything wrong. But
yeah, it's when you're talking about moral doctrines in society,
it's pretty tough.
It's tough stuff. Yeah,
especially if you don't know, like.
I mean, I certainly haven't read the Swedish social doctrine, right?
And I don't
try to refer
all
to it.
Canon law in the Catholic Church either.
Yeah.
So, but when councils are called, it's for a specific purpose in mind to talk about how the society is changing and what are the modern implications of Jesus' teachings, right? And so, it's not necessarily that what's written in old books. Well, I shouldn't say old books, but
the Bible. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah. Call it what it is, the Bible.
Yeah.
What's written in the Bible is what is completely understood in today's world, right? I don't know, man. I don't want to say too much.
Yeah, but do you see how that's still an undemocratic process, right? So let's take two hypothetical examples, right? If all of the Catholics in the world, excluding the clergy, right, have a shift of morality, I don't think they would be able to implement a change in institution unless the Catholic clergy agree with that change, right? So if everyone, let's say magically everybody in the Catholic world, right, decides that we're going to shift the main point of Catholicism from abortion, as you've stated previously, is the main issue in Catholicism, to climate change, right? Now all of a sudden, that's the main point, and the main point of being a Catholic is
funny you say that
because
we've actually had that in our Pope Francis.
Yeah.
Right? Like his main point is not abortion.
Right. But it's still a top-down change, right? Pope Francis, he's the head of the Catholic Church that decided that, and the Catholic
population.
The Catholic population, the churchgoers, weren't consulted when that change was made, right?
No, it's very top down.
It's top
down. And
the
reason why it's top down is because it's almost like a republic in that sense, where we have not elected officials, but people who are well learned in Catholic doctrine, who understand it better than the normal people, just your normal churchgoers, your laity. And so it's necessary to have that process because otherwise you get Protestantism, where anyone can decide what Catholic Church teaching is. And when you have that, you strip away the universality of the Catholic Church. So it's necessary for us to have a pope and cardinals and bishops, right?
Yeah.
And it isn't supposed to be democratic because religion is not a political system, right? It's not a political system. So it's necessary to have a central authority figure who can determine what the Catholic Church's role in society is and how it should act and what problems it should address.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I think, and also, back onto Confucianism, Catholic Church always talks about obedience, right? Obedience between the clergymen, obedience from the people themselves as well. Because if we didn't have this obedience, then if we didn't have this obedience in the Catholic Church, then anyone can make their own doctrine any time, right? And then again, you'd go back to Protestantism, and also Gallicanism, which was a heresy condemned by the Catholic Church. So and there's no evidence that having a church that was somewhat democratic would be better for the church.
Yeah. Well, so I'd like to talk more about that distinction between Protestantism and Catholicism, right? If the ultimate goal of a Christian church, not Catholic or Protestant, right? A hypothetical Christian church, was to get people to follow the teachings of Jesus purely, right? Without any sort of, imposed human tradition. Wouldn't it be most effective to have a broad variety of different doctrines that people can latch onto? Like for example, some people might really latch on to the idea of heaven and sacrificing their earthly pleasures in order to receive eternal happiness in the afterlife, right? Or others might latch on to the fact that Jesus emphasized helping the poor and the needy here on earth, sacrificing your own personal wealth to help those that don't have that wealth. And you also have another church that, I don't know, I'm not so well versed in Christian doctrine.
They're doing another good thing that Jesus taught, right?
Right, but I think that having one universal interpretation of Christianity might ostracize some people that don't necessarily have a personal connection to that specific interpretation of Christianity, right? So by having a more diverse set of interpretations of Jesus' teachings, I think it would actually bring in more people into Christianity as a whole, right? Because individuals can latch on to the specific things that they personally relate to, as opposed to just having one universal doctrine. And if you don't fit into that doctrine, sorry, buddy, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think the difference is we're kind of looking at this through the lens of, let's say, an author of a book.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take Shakespeare, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Because then if you take Shakespeare, we say, oh, well, when he says this, it means, this interpretation. And other people may say, no, when he says that, it actually means this interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the difference is Shakespeare was a fallible human being, right? And when we claim to have the words of Jesus Christ, who was also God, his words are that were upheld and that were written down by the four authors of the gospel, given by the Holy Spirit, their ability to reteach what Jesus taught, then you lose the actual truths of Jesus Christ. Because if you don't have people who write down the actual interpretations of the Bible that are in concordance with the Bible, then you lose all of Christianity. What I mean is when you have people who are framing the Catholic Church for their society, then you lose the universality of the Catholic Church. Because in order for something to be true, it has to be true across all spectrums, right? It can't be just true for one people's. So it's a big error to say that the Catholic Church can rewrite its truths in order to fit the modern person, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not...
And I'll grant you the point.
Yeah.
So I'll grant you the point that if you have people that can interpret the Bible specifically for their region, it would definitely spread Catholicism.
Yeah.
But it would also cease to be Catholicism. It would spread a pseudo-Catholicism.
I'm not talking about Catholicism. I'm just talking about Christianity.
Well, Christianity,
whole, right?
Christianity as a whole.
Yeah.
Well, if you're talking about Christianity as a whole, then you're talking about Protestantism and their interpretations of the Bible.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of other types of Christians. There's Coptic Christians in Egypt, and there's old churches in Ethiopia and stuff that have been around longer than the Catholic Church and Protestantism that have their own specific interpretations of Jesus's teachings.
So what are you asking again? Like specifically?
I don't know. I just think that having I don't know. I'm just sort of opposed to absolute truths, right? Because I think that everything is up for interpretation and debate, and that by having concrete absolute truths that you put forth as this is the only way, there's no other interpretation, it sort of curtails the intellectual debate that should surround religion.
If you do say that something is absolutely true, let's say, if I claim that there's no such thing as absolute truth, and me saying that there's no such thing as absolute truth is a true statement, then that means that truth must exist.
Right.
Yeah. And so therefore the statement there is no such thing as absolute truth is a paradox.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is, right? But I'm just opposed to putting things forth as absolute. I think that everything, you're right. It is a paradox, right? If that statement is true, then there is such
Then
thing
there's
as an
such
absolute
thing as
truth,
truth, yeah.
right? But I just think that, I think that everything should be up for intellectual debate, and that by having an institution that curtails that debate and curtails the intellectual rigor that an idea such as religion should have, it sort of, I don't know. I think it dictates what people should think. While I think that a thing that says abstract and up for interpretation as religion really should be up to the individual to interpret themselves.
Yeah, well, it might seem that way, but
Yeah.
Every time I hear individual interpretation, I kind of I seize up a little bit, because that's the reason why we had Martin Luther split from the Catholic Church, is because he wanted to individually interpret the Bible himself.
Yeah.
And I mean, there were reasons for it too. The Catholic Church kind of sucked at the time period.
Yeah. But so I mean, what's fundamentally wrong with an individual interpreting Jesus' teachings themselves, right? Because I feel like, especially with religion, finding your own truth is an admirable goal, right? And that, I mean, religion is incredibly abstract, and as you said, no one in the modern world actually listened to Jesus themselves, right? All they have is these interpretations through the Gospels.
But it's enough. It's enough
passed down thousands of years and translated into English, and
that's right,
from Greek to Latin to English.
And
right?
how do we know what he actually said?
Right. So I think that it's. I mean, I think that even within the Catholic Church, if you talk to all the Catholics in the world, you'll find that there is some disparity in their own interpretations.
Oh yeah, it definitely exists already. That's for sure.
And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that having everybody believe the same thing, curtails individuality and ultimately hurts the religion, because it forces people to conform to one specific belief, as opposed to finding their own merits within Jesus' teachings.
Yeah. Okay. So we kind of see that in the Catholic Church already today, like you already mentioned. So about the Coptic in Egypt, the Coptic Rite Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox Catholics in Russia, your Chaldean rites in Iran.
Yeah.
Right. So we see all these different types of Catholicism, all Catholic, right? Because they all are still Catholic, but they have different practices. And their Eucharist is still valid, right? So we already do see some sort of individual interpretation. I don't know if interpretation is the right word.
Yeah.
But some sort of
individual Christianity, right? I mean,
sure.
They latch on to different points.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Because they adapt to their surroundings, right? The Christianity adapts to the surroundings of the people, but it's still universal in the fact that they all have the exact truths of Christianity. When we're talking about individual interpretation, there's nothing to say that a person can't become Mormon, right? And say, well, this prophet. We uphold, Christian teachings, but there's another prophet, his name's Joseph Smith, and this angel, blew his horn or whatever. I don't even know. But when that happens, they're outside. They cease to be Catholic anymore because they start to rewrite Catholic doctrine to fit their people. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have these different, I don't know if interpretation is the right word, but practices, all that are Catholic within Eastern Orthodox, Coptics, and whatever, right? That are all still Christian, right? But it ceased to become Christianity, Catholicism, when a person decides to change the doctrine in a severe way that contradicts Catholic tradition already. That's what I'm really getting at.
Yeah.
And so again, it might be. It would be expedient for the church to say that everyone has their own personal Jesus in their heart, that they can all find their own personal Jesus and figure out, whatever Jesus taught them, interpret the Bible themselves and figure out what it was. Although that would spread Christianity, it would cease to be universal, right? And that's a necessary part of Catholicism. That's actually what Catholic means, is universal, right?
I mean, I feel like it would be more universal in a way, right? Because
But it would it would lose truth along the way, right?
well, I mean, that's with the precedent that the current Catholic doctrine is the truth, right?
Yeah, assuming it is.
Yeah.
Assuming it is.
Yeah. But I don't know. I feel like you and I can both, hopefully we can agree on this precedent that doctrine interpreted by humans is inherently imperfect, right? No matter how well studied the clergy is, no matter how, well versed in Christianity the Pope is, there's always going to be some human error because they are humans.
I can't agree with that premise.
Yeah.
The reason why I can't agree with the premise is because we believe that the Holy Spirit speaks through people the teachings of God Himself. Mm-hmm. Right. This is complicated territory, but when the Pope speaks from the chair of Peter
mm-hmm.
and declares infallibility, mm-hmm. then that means it's true and it's Catholic doctrine. So I mean it's this is Catholic theology stuff, but
I don't know. I feel like that is a result of the Roman Empire basically saying that this specific chair in Rome is the one chair, right? And I feel like that's a human interpretation. Jesus didn't say anything about the
well, he established the church on earth,
right?
And the chair of he gave Peter the Pope the gates of. This is a lot of Catholic theology stuff.
Okay,
I don't know
let's
if
get
this
into
is
it.
boring,
Yeah.
but he gave Peter the keys to heaven and earth, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound on heaven,
mm-hmm.
bound in heaven,
mm-hmm.
right? And so that gave him power over the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and so that's where, and all the descendants of the Pope, even up to today,
mm-hmm.
Pope Francis, have been elected by cardinals.
Mm-hmm.
Except for Peter,
mm-hmm.
have been chosen to become the Pope of Rome,
mm-hmm.
The Bishop of Rome, and to govern the people
mm-hmm.
of the Catholic Church. So it's a lot of Catholic theology stuff.
Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like within that, there must be human error, right? Because
definitely.
Cardinals are people. And, I'm sure that if there are two papal candidates and one is a, more Orthodox Christian, right, and calls out the faults of all the cardinals, says, listen, you're sinning right there. How can you claim to represent the Catholic Church if you're committing this sin, right? And you're, goes on the attack, right, criticizing all of the cardinals. And then there's another one who is just a really good butt kisser. And,
there was a pope that had children.
Yeah.
Like he straight up just had children, and one of his children he elected to be cardinal at like 18.
Talk about nepotism, right? And
the Catholic Church has fallen into error. Well, I shouldn't say it's fallen into error, but it's had errors within the Catholic Church
mm-hmm.
many times.
Yeah.
Right, but it still remains the true Catholic Church because it's still descendant from Peter. That's why the Pope is so important.
Yeah.
Because he's a direct connection to Peter.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And having that central authority figure in the Catholic Church to govern the entire peoples
mm-hmm.
is necessary for the success of the church. Because if you have one guy who is validly elected Pope,
mm-hmm.
that means he has the power to have the final say in all doctrine and
mm-hmm.
how the church is in the modern world. It's so important.
Yeah, but if that Pope can be falsely elected, then I feel like that sort of negates that.
Yeah, and there are people
ideal,
who believe
right?
that.
Mm-hmm.
They're called sede vacantists,
mm-hmm.
which basically means the seat of the Vatican is empty.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's not been a validly elected pope since Pope Paul VI,
mm-hmm.
who was elected pope in, 1958, 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
And they're condemned as heretics.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Screw them. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we talked enough Catholic.
Yeah, I think we have too.
Catholic theology.
It's if you really are interested about that, you won't want to learn from me because I'm very not well learned.
Yeah, it's okay. But I mean, you're the most Catholic dude I know, so okay. I feel like you're the best source to talk about these things.
I mean, if you really care about what the Catholic Church teaches, then read the Baltimore Catechism or read the Summa Theologica by Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah,
right? So and those two books are a lot smarter and more coherent than me.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Let's move on to something more interesting.
All right, what do you got? What do you got?
Let's move on to what's happening in politics today, right? Because I feel like every time we talk about
topics,
that, it's a hot topic. We get animated about it.
Yeah.
So how's Bernie's caucuses going?
Bernie's doing great, man. I mean, Nevada is coming up tomorrow, I think, on Saturday, and the polls say he's gonna win, right? But then again, after 2016, I have an inherent distrust of polls, right?
Yeah.
I just don't like them, and I think that judging an election off of those polls, can actually hurt the front runner in those polls because people say, well, Hillary Clinton's going to win. I don't need to vote, right? It says she has a 99% chance of winning the election. Fuck it. I don't really care about it, right? Yeah. So as
that
much
was
as
a big deal, dude. That was a huge deal.
No, I remember I was sitting on election night just watching all these states flipping red. Michigan, right, which is a traditionally blue state, winning, Trump winning that, Wisconsin, traditionally blue state as well, going red. I was watching, like, oh my god, like after half of the delegates were announced, I just threw in the towel. I'm like, I'm gonna go to sleep and see what happens when I wake up. I don't want to watch this shit.
Yeah, I remember all those people on SNL and just hosts of shows were like, yeah, Trump has no chance whatever at all. And then I saw this mishmash of all montage. We'll call it a montage of all these people who had said
mishmash though.
Mishmash, yeah. Who had all said, yeah, Trump has no chance of winning.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Trump wins.
Yeah. And there's that Jim Baker supercut. My Vic Burger.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is the president. His wife just
nothing but a miracle from God.
A miracle from God, yeah.
God. Jim Baker. That guy's nuts.
Dude is crazy.
He's
Talk
insane.
about a personal interpretation of the Bible. Well, if you want to get into heaven, you got to give me money. Ridiculous.
You got to buy this queso dip. It'll last you forever.
What are you gonna do with the doo-doo?
Oh my goodness. I hope people actually know what we're talking about.
No, they don't. They don't at all, but it's okay. I enjoy it.
Super Deluxe Jim Baker.
Yeah, look it up right now.
It's just,
stop the podcast.
Go to there.
Go there. Watch Jim Baker. Yeah.
That might be my favorite video on YouTube.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's so good.
I'm just slurping up the guacamole.
Yeah.
Oh my
Mexican.
God, ridiculous.
Yeah.
We got a Mexican baby here.
So ridiculous.
Oh my God, dude is crazy.
His edits are insane. His editing skills are so good.
Yeah. Vic Berger is a god.
He's probably the best. Well, I should say the best, but he's just such a good editor.
Such a good editor. He throws in the air horns right at the right time. Yeah.
Oh
Ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
Well,
back on to politics. I don't know. I mean, I see that Bernie is looking like the front runner, right? And it's taken a long time for the Democratic Party or the corporate media as a whole to sort of admit that. They've been negating his rise, negating the movement, negating the revolution for over a year now, saying...
Revolution.
That's what it is. Our revolution, baby. That's the title of his book. I'm just citing the sources. Yeah, I mean, they've tried their best to write him off as an anomaly, but 2 caucuses in, he's won both of them in terms of the popular vote. Fuck Pete Buttigieg and his snaky bureaucratic ways.
Dude, Mike Bloomberg too, man. I keep seeing his ads everywhere.
It's ridiculous.
I'll be on YouTube or something and I'll just see there'll be 5 different ads in 3 videos or something. It's crazy.
And the thing is, he's such an uncharismatic guy that he isn't even in the ads. Right, it'll just be a supercut of
pictures of him.
Yeah, pictures of him and just people talking over. We got to get rid of Trump. We got to we got to get more jobs.
Bernie Sanders is just, I need your financial support.
It's just him in an office.
It's him walking down the street.
Exactly.
With a coat,
Exactly. He doesn't need anybody but him. Right.
No.
Everybody knows what he stands for. But yeah, let's talk about Mike Bloomberg for a second.
Mike Bloomberg is crazy.
He's a piece of shit.
I don't know. Well,
he's the worst. He's the worst of the worst.
He is a Democratic billionaire. I can say that.
Well, the thing is, he's
worth so much money.
He's worth an incredible amount of money. And the reason he's worth all that money is because he basically, or not even him, his company, and the people working for him wrote some software that made it. That wrote basically the Bloomberg terminals. I forget the specific lingo, right? That basically made it easier to buy and trade stocks, which basically it just sped up the process of Wall Street bureaucracy. And he makes a little bit of change every time someone buys or sells a stock using the terminals.
Jeez. Okay, so question: how much do you think Mike Bloomberg's worth?
I don't know, 100 billion.
62.
62.
No, 65.2.
65.2 billion.
Billion dollars.
I mean, Jesus, like
That's so much money.
and he owns a media empire with his
yeah,
name
yeah,
slapped all over it. He was the mayor of New York for 10 years, and like, I don't know. One talking point that I find really reprehensible is that he's being altruistic by spending all this money on his campaign. They're like, well, look, he's putting that money aside for a good cause, right? He's spending it on the Democratic Party, right? Like that's something he brings up a lot in debates, and his supporters like to cite as something that's good. It's like, no, that's not good, right? If you're spending your personal wealth to get yourself elected, right? I think I don't know how much has he spent now? Like somewhere.
Can we actually see how much he spent?
Let's look it up. I don't know.
I don't know. I thought that was like under the dark money or whatever.
Yeah, no, I think that it should be public knowledge. I'll take a second to look it up here.
For sure.
But
yeah, Mike Bloomberg. It really seems like I think he's the perfect example of a person can climb the ladder in politics just because of wealth.
I got no internet. Can you do it?
Yeah, I can do it.
All right.
It really seems like a person can climb the political ladder because they have money.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a term for it. I forget what the term is, but people who are in a democratic society only get elected because they're wealthy.
Yeah,
elitist,
an oligarchy.
Oligarchy,
yeah,
sure.
something like that. I don't know. There's a tons of terms, but like, if he really wanted to spend that money altruistically, improving our country, if he had taken all that money and, I don't know, funded renewable energy, right, to curtail, the fossil fuel industry, right, just gave grants for renewable energy products. And I'm a little biased because both my parents work in that industry, and I like for them to, get some checks.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
how much?
just searched it up.
How much?
Okay, how much do you think his weekly advertising spending on Google is?
I don't know.
$5.4 million.
5.4. Like, imagine if he took that money and, I don't know, spent it on public housing. He could have ended the homelessness crisis in America by now.
$5.4 million in Google advertising. That's just Google.
Just Google.
That's just Google. That's not talking about Facebook.
Not TV, not
or
Facebook.
Instagram.
Yeah, none of that stuff. Like, he is just spending an incredible amount of money so he himself can get elected to be president. I mean, I think it's definitely not altruistic, and I think I would claim that it's incredibly selfish, right? You're spending money to further your own political career and boost yourself up the Democratic Party and put yourself in charge of the country when none of the country really wants to get you up there. I mean, the reason he's only doing well in the polls is because he has name recognition, because everybody sees his name all over the damn place.
It's messed up, man.
And it's
$5.4 million
a week.
A week.
I mean, imagine how much good that money could have done, right? If it had, I mean, not even talking about spending it here in America. Imagine how many, cases of malaria that could have cured, right? And how many people he could have given access to clean water, right? Or, improve the crumbling infrastructure of our country, right? I mean, there's a million other things that he could have spent that money on that would have actually improved the material standard of living of so many people. But instead, he's just putting that right into the pocket of advertisers, right? Just so he himself can get boosted up the polls and buy a spot on the debate stage and just get roasted by everybody up there. I mean, did you watch the debate?
No, I didn't.
I didn't really watch the whole thing. I just watched some clips, and right out the gate, Elizabeth Warren, I have my personal gripes with her, but she just lit him up. To sort of badly quote her, she was like, "We are running against an opponent who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians." And I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg. And she was right next to him. She just, looked right at him.
Are you serious?
Yeah. And he just, started rolling his eyes and looking all like, oh, yeah, whatever. Right. And just the entire debate was just everybody roasting Bloomberg. And I thought it was great. I thought,
okay,
that man
I like that too.
Deserves to get his ass lit up. And one specific thing that they latched onto was how many women he has in non-disclosure agreements for sexual harassment. Right?
Really?
All these
well,
women,
okay, that doesn't mean anything though.
Really? I mean,
I don't think it does, because anyone can be accused.
Well, no, he has them in non-disclosure agreements, which means
means.
he paid them money
to
legally not say anything about what he did, right?
Really?
So we don't know what he did, right? But if he has paid off an unknowable amount of women, right, to be quiet, and it's more than one. and it's more than 10, right? So I feel like that clearly shows a pattern of sexually harassing women in the workplace, and they were all his subordinates, right?
He was the boss.
He was the boss of the company,
Wow.
and he said some sexist shit, or made a joke about them, right? As a woman,
And then gave him $20
and
million.
then gave him a lot of money to shut the fuck up, right?
Wow.
And how can the Democratic Party be like, yeah, that's the guy we want running against
representing our
Donald
country,
Trump,
yeah.
right? Like not even talking about how good or bad of a president he would be. I think he would be a horrible president. I mean, just look at his policies in New York City. But just in terms of electability, it's about as bad optics as you can get, right? One racist, sexist billionaire running against another, purely on partisan lines, right? In order to get passionate and go out to vote for Bloomberg, you really have to believe that a Democrat is just better than a Republican on face value, just because they're a Democrat, right? And that's not going to get the working people of this country fired up. I'm certainly not going to volunteer and put my time aside so that Mike Bloomberg can get fucking elected as president. Like, there's no way that working people of this country are going to put aside their time and their vote just because a Democrat is better than a Republican. That's it.
Well, there's a substantial amount of people who vote merely on who they see the most.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you looked at the ways that people vote, but we talked about it last year in my politics class, but there's a substantial amount of people who vote purely based on party affiliation and who they've seen the most.
Yeah. And I mean, that's...
And Mike Bloomberg, I don't know, man. I see him all over the place.
Yeah, and
just everywhere. He's everywhere.
Yeah, and I mean, I really hope that. I mean, the thing about pre-voting polls is that they poll pretty much everybody, right? Not just the people that are going to actually vote in the election, right? So if you get a phone call, who are you going to vote for? I don't know, Bloomberg, Biden, right? It often goes on name recognition, right? Just what name pops into your head the first, right? But I really genuinely hope that sort of representation is misaligned, right? Because to go out and vote on polling day, March 3rd, polls open at 7, close at 8 here in California. It takes effort and takes time, and I hope that people that are passive and not passionate about any particular candidate decide not to put their time aside to vote for that candidate, right? And
I feel like this is kind of a switching up the topic a little bit from Mike Bloomberg, although I feel like we should roast him some more.
Fuck that guy. I mean, before we switch up, I want to talk about the stop and frisk policy, right?
Oh yeah.
So this is a policy that he implemented
in New York
as the mayor of New York, which basically it was shot down by a court about after he was unelected.
It's such an infringement on the 13th Amendment, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. It's basically allows police officers to discriminate and say that guy looks like a criminal.
Looks like he has drugs on him,
and I'm just gonna throw him up against the wall and search
him.
Right, and it disproportionately targeted black and brown people in New York, and basically severely infringed on their rights and resulted in a massive level of incarceration, mainly for small levels of marijuana possession, right? A majority of the arrests that were made as a result of the stop and frisk policy were just dudes carrying an 8-sack, right? That's it, right? Which I feel like those are not criminals that we need to get off our streets. Those are dudes that just trying to get high, right? And that has its own problems, and I've certainly been in that situation, and I've since moved out of it, gotten sober, but I feel like imprisoning that person basically destines them to become a criminal, because once you have a criminal record, it's incredibly hard to get a job.
Absolutely.
And you are pushed out of civil society, and you basically have no other option but to become a criminal, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, you think, if you go to jail,
especially Rikers Island, right?
Shoot, yeah, dude. Rikers Island is like the worst jail.
It's so fucked.
Well, I should say it's the worst jail in America. I'm sure there's worse in like the South or something.
Yeah.
But chain gang stuff.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
This probably still exists.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a big problem in America, and I don't know. I don't see any real solution to the problem. Well, actually, I do see a clear solution. What am I saying? I'm just saying words. Solution is decriminalize marijuana.
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason why it's still up on the tier 1 drug list.
Yeah,
or
with
whatever.
heroin and cocaine. Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
That's
seriously,
just ridiculous.
it's really ridiculous. And the last thing America needs are more people incarcerated.
Yeah,
like, that's the last thing.
We have the biggest population of prisoners in the world.
Yeah.
Bigger than China, bigger than India,
Wow.
bigger than any other country.
And it costs us a ton of money too.
Yeah,
Like, that's the other thing. How much
yeah.
tax money is going to
Too much.
holding these prisoners?
Too much.
Prisoners, right? I mean, in air quotes.
Yeah.
Like, who knows if they're actually supposed to be in there? Oh, dude, talk about like.
They can't hear you.
Yeah. There's a real problem with like people being accused of a rape crime.
Mm-hmm.
And them denying it,
Mhm.
them still going to jail because in this country it's almost guilty until proven innocent at this point. And these people are sent through jail for like 30 years, and then they get out, and because DNA evidence comes in, they find out, well, you didn't actually rape him, and then the woman says, "Oh yeah, I was lying about the whole thing."
Yeah.
Now that just blows me away. It makes me unbelievably upset.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's also a pretty significant amount of people that do get raped and they don't catch the raper. And so I feel like there is a side to both sides of that story. And I don't know. I think that problem is relatively overblown. I mean, I think that it is bad that a person can accuse another person of a sex crime and destroy their life purely on an accusation, whether it's based in truth or not. But I think that we should believe the victims of sex crimes, and we should support them in their struggle. But I think that the more important sort of attack really should be on people that lie about being raped. Right? That's the important that's the important cause there. And by lying about being raped, you are discounting and demeaning people that have actually been raped, and you're using that horrible crime for your own personal benefit. And I think that that's pretty reprehensible.
Yeah, it's messed up.
Yeah. But yeah, and sort of bringing it back to Bloomberg, he said in an interview, dude, I'm pissed. I hate the guy. He said in an interview that like it was recorded factually that the stop and frisk disproportionately stopped black and brown men, 18 to 25, people that are already disenfranchised by our institutions. And Mike Bloomberg, in response to that, said that we are not targeting minority neighborhoods enough, and that we are doing too many stop and frisks in white neighborhoods, which is like, no, bro, it's the complete opposite.
I don't understand. What does he think is the outcome of having this stop and frisk policy?
He is I think he's a racist at core, and he believes that black people and brown people are criminals, right? And that by targeting them, you're going to reduce crime. Right, and that's just a fundamental belief of his that's also held by the NYPD. So they team up as a team and just implement a racist policy that actually results in a higher crime rate, because throwing not criminals, or I don't know, a good way to say that.
Not criminals.
Throwing not criminals in jail turns them
Innocent
into criminals.
Well, look, man, I really do believe that when you have this policy where you can stop anyone on the street at any time for not doing anything wrong, then what ends up happening is you have this massive distrust of your elected officials. And, it really hinders the society from doing anything productive, because then because trust is the number one, it's a necessity for people to have trust in government, or not even trust in government, but just trust in people.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you don't have trust in people, then you can't get very far. Right. So having that stop and frisk policy just adds to the distrust of, black and brown citizens of New York. But on an even bigger note, like Bloomberg, I saw an ad the other day that was talking specifically about how the black community loves him, and how he's the number one, black candidate supporter. And dude, it's just all the way back to Noam Chomsky. The media at this point is very corrupt, and you can't trust what they say. Right. And I don't know. Maybe it's not a very good point what I'm saying, but like Mike Bloomberg is just not a very good guy.
Fuck that guy.
I don't like him at all.
Yeah.
I don't like his ads.
Yeah. Annoying.
Very annoying. It's like, where's Mike Bloomberg in this ad?
I know.
This is still picture.
They just throw his name at the end of it, right?
Yeah, Mike Bloomberg. He's a successful businessman, and he's here to help the American
Yeah,
people.
we're gonna
beat Trump.
We're gonna bring jobs back, right? Which I feel like is the dumbest claim for any candidate.
I'm
gonna bring jobs. Bring jobs. It's like, yeah, no shit. Everybody's gonna bring jobs, bro. Like, that's not a good selling point.
No.
Right? Because every single candidate says that they're gonna bring jobs. How are you an anomaly then? What are you gonna actually change about the system, right? Yeah, sure. America has an incredibly low unemployment rate right now, historically, right? We are at some of the lowest rates of unemployment ever in history,
yeah.
right? But a significant amount of people in this country work 2 jobs and still live in poverty because the minimum wage is so damn low. And I think that ultimately, bringing lots of jobs can't be a priority if those jobs don't financially support the people that are working them.
Which is why you support raising the minimum wage, right?
Mm-hmm.
To a living wage.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that's whenever someone advocates for raising the minimum wage, as Bernie Sanders is, $15 an hour, right, which I feel like is pretty reasonable.
Amazon and another company already started doing that, right?
Really?
Yeah. He put pressure on Amazon to raise the minimum wage to 15. They did.
As they should, right? I feel like the immediate reaction of business owners and the right side of the American political spectrum is immediately that will put businesses out of business, right? If you make us pay our employees a living wage, the economy is going to stagnate, and you're not going to have the level of consumerism that you have now, right?
Well, well, go ahead.
No. But ultimately, by increasing the cost of labor, you're actually speeding up the process of automation, right? Which, as a whole in society, is a very good thing, right? The reason that we have such incredibly productive jobs and one worker can produce so much of a good or service as opposed to 200 or 2,000 years ago is because of automation, right?
Yeah.
We have machines that complement our labor that increase individual productivity. So by boosting the minimum wage and increasing the cost of labor, it provides further incentives for companies to innovate and create automation, right? Which at the end of the day benefits all of us, right?
Yeah, well, it's a short-term hurt, but it's a long-term gain.
Yeah, exactly. So by artificially, or not artificially, but by maintaining a low labor cost, you're hurting the people that are laboring, obviously, but you are also hurting the economy as a whole because you're not pushing for automation, right?
Yeah.
Because by having, if you can pay someone $1 an hour, you're not going to invest in research that finds alternatives for that labor, right?
Sure.
I mean, I think that.
But if your labor is $15 an hour, you're going to look for more automation because your labor is so expensive.
Exactly, and you're going to, like, for example, let's take a McDonald's, for example. Right now, there might be 3 cashiers up there taking money and giving orders to the back, but you pay them $5 an hour or whatever it is. It's still productive to do that, right? Because $5 an hour is not that much, right? And you can, it's more expensive to do research into automation, right? But now you raise it up to $15 an hour. Now all of a sudden it's incredibly expensive to have 3 people up there being cashiers, and McDonald's is going to look for a cheaper alternative, which is going to be having computers do it, right? Which you see in a lot of McDonald's now. And when I went to China, pretty much there's no cashiers, right? All the it's these big tablets that you select your order and it sends it back to the kitchen and it'll come out in 2 minutes, right? Which means that one McDonald's can produce the same amount of goods and services with less people, making those people more productive, increasing the productivity of our nation as a whole, and freeing up those people to do more productive jobs, right? Like becoming bloggers or Instagram stars.
That's right. Well, I mean, yeah. That's always like the part 2 to automation is like, yeah, you're going to displace people, but what ends up happening is those people that were working those shitty cashier jobs over at McDonald's now get to hopefully get a higher paying job.
That's right.
I mean, and it's
And the jobs are bound to be higher paid
That's
because
right.
they'll be more productive.
yeah, that's right. And also that's why education is super important when you raise the minimum wage as well. Like you need to have a good education system where that so that you can educate people to a specific task that will pay more, because those lower paying jobs, although they will pay more, are going to be lost eventually.
Yeah.
And it's just better for the society altogether.
Yeah. I feel like, we've reached this point many times, but funding education is one of the most productive uses of public money that there is.
Yep.
Right? Because when you have a more educated society, even if you yourself are not educated, right? You dropped out of high school like I did.
Not necessarily. I didn't drop out.
I did.
Okay,
I dropped out of high school.
I thought you were saying I dropped out.
I pointed at you, but I said I. It benefits everybody. Even if you are not one of the people that are being educated, living in a society with highly educated people is just better, right? Because
I think there needs a lot of reform to the education system too.
So I mean, what are some big reforms that you think could change? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about it a little bit.
know education right now currently is a very messed up system. So when I was in Colorado, I had the best high school education I've ever had, and that was because we had teachers that genuinely wanted to teach their students. And I don't know why that was. I don't know what incentives they had to get really good teachers at the school.
Yeah.
But like, it was such a good experience because I was actually fired up to go to class every day because I was genuinely interested in what was being taught in every class that I had. Like, I took a computer science class and I failed out of it, but it was one of my most interesting classes I've ever had.
Yeah.
It was extraordinarily tough.
Yeah.
And I dropped out before, the semester ended and whatever. But yeah, like I had no idea what they were doing there that was so effective, but every one of my teachers was fired up about teaching. All the students were fired up about learning. Now, juxtapose that with where we live now in California. I went to Scripps Ranch High School for 2 months, and I had a terrible counselor. She put me in all the worst classes I could get into with the worst teachers at the school. And every time I would go to class, I would just hate myself for going to this class because it sucked. And my teachers didn't know anything. They were very uneducated themselves. Yeah. Very bad at teaching, and we're not doing a good job at all in the slightest. Yeah. And so there's this huge disparity between education systems. First off, and it's not very it's not nationalized as well because it seems like this, between, I can only really speak from Colorado and California, that the way that the classes are taught are completely different, and the way that the teachers teach are completely different, and there's this inconsistency with teaching, right? And I feel that there needs to be a consistent, not curriculum necessarily, but a consistently good teachers for any class that you take, because right now there are certain teachers that you get who are completely easy, that everything they teach is a joke, and it's their class you don't even have to pay attention to at all. And there's other classes that are extraordinarily hard, where every second you must be paying attention. Yeah. And so I feel like this inconsistency promotes people only choosing those easier options to get through high school, and therefore their education's lower than those people who only took very tough classes and maybe got a better education. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that
there needs to be, so what I'm really wrapping up, there really needs to be a consistently good teaching standard in America, right? And I think that's achieved one way is by promoting, is by trying to get more qualified people into those teaching positions.
Yeah, and I think that the number one factor in terms of attracting more qualified people is the pay rate, right? Because as of now, at least in public schools, public school teachers make very, very little money, right? They make at minimum wage or less than in some cases, because they can get paid less than because there's a reduction in their taxes, right? Which leads to the school system being...
They also have like 3 months of vacation time too.
Yeah, but they don't get paid for that.
Yeah, I know.
They don't make money during the summer.
But they still accept the 3 months of vacation time.
Yeah. But ultimately, I feel like, the number one factor or the number one incentive that you can provide for more qualified people becoming teachers is by paying them more, right? Because as of now, really the only people, if you are an incredibly talented, hardworking, passionate person that wants to teach kids, you basically have to live in poverty, and a lot of people do make that sacrifice. They say, this is my passion, I don't care about my material needs, I'm just going to do it because it's something I'm passionate about. But I feel like there is a significant amount of people that would consider being a teacher, however they don't want to live in poverty, so they choose another career. And so by raising the wages of teachers, you can incentivize more talented, hardworking people to become teachers, and therefore improve the quality of the education.
Well, if you really want to, if you want to create a society of people that are better citizens, like just straight up better citizens, then the number one thing you can do, in my opinion, is better the education system. Because the education system always has taught people how to be good citizens in the United States, right? How to be well equipped for the workplace and how to be well equipped for living in society. And it's so simple. It's not simple. I shouldn't say it's simple because it's a complicated issue with a lot of nuances in between it. But the idea is simple, that helping people to be better learned in the ways of life. I know it's kind of a cliche or whatever. Making people smarter will benefit the society in ways that you have no idea. In there was a study done where they analyzed soccer teams, and they found that making the star of the team better, actually was less effective than raising the worst player and making him better. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what I think this can be applied to many cases as well, is instead of making the star of the team who scores most of the goals better, but instead raise the worst player on the team to the average level. What I mean is, if you have the dumbest kids in America, and instead of making them unbelievably dumb and stupid, but instead raising them to the average level, it will help the society more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Instead of having your rich kid who might go to Berkeley, instead make him go to Harvard. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, but that's sort of a hard hurdle to tackle, right? Because by teaching to the bottom, you are in a way ostracizing the middle and the top, right? So I think that the solution to do that, or a solution which might work, is by segmenting classes more, right? So instead of having all English classes just be English classes, and there is a equal mix of talented students, average students, and untalented students, you instead segment it a little bit more. So there's a class of all the bright kids, right? All the middle kids, and then all the dumb kids, right?
Yeah.
We're using derogatory terms here, but
dumb kids is fine.
Stupid kids, right?
Stupid. No, I think that's a really good point, because people learn at different rates.
Yeah, and by teaching to a class that has a unified standard of intellectuality.
The very bright kids
right?
are brought down.
Yeah.
And the very low kids stay at the low. Right.
Yeah.
And the middle kids are above as well.
Yeah. I think that it would probably improve. But then again, I don't know, I feel like having brighter students in a class also improves the experience of the classroom as a whole, right? If you have one or two kids that are constantly questioning the teacher and poking holes in their theories, and basically providing the intellectual rigor that should be in a classroom, it actually improves the education of the students as a whole. You know what I mean? It shouldn't, by putting all the responsibility, bless you, on the teacher, it sort of creates a undemocratic system where the learning is completely a one-way flow, where there's no reciprocation from the students, and that by having bright students in a classroom with less bright students, you can kind of promote intellectual rigor among the less bright students that sort of, I don't know. I'm trailing off here.
No,
right?
I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean.
So I feel like there's kind of two sides.
Yeah,
two sides
if you
to
remove those students that are constantly challenging the teacher, then what ends up happening is you get a propagandized version of history or English. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So in order to have
maybe
those,
not propaganda, but biased. Right? You just get the perspective of the teacher without the perspective of the others.
That's right.
Which should be in any intellectual discussion, right? When you're discussing anything, there should be a variety of viewpoints, and those viewpoints should be considered and debated.
Which I think
decided upon.
Which I think is a grave error in most of people's thinking today. Is very black and white. That it's either this or that. But instead of considering all the necessary factors that play into a certain issue, they only choose one or two options and say that this is either right or that's either right.
Yeah.
So, and it's especially important in history too, because I think we were talking about this at lunch one time, is that when you have a teacher that's only teaching American history as Americans are the victor and the kind of the police of the world, right, which I've heard a few times now, it is completely biased and is completely misrepresenting what American history is about.
Yeah. And by, and I mean, in my American history classes, they sort of touch on the crimes of America, right? The genocide of the Native Americans that lived here, right? The Trail of Tears, the Vietnam, slavery, right? And then the mass incarceration that followed. But I feel like they sort of whitewash those topics, right? They give you the facts. The Trail of Tears happened in 1840, right? And the Cherokees used to live here, and now they don't, right? But by whitewashing those facts, they add it to the student's consciousness without really applying any of the emotional. I don't know. They don't give any real firsthand deep looks at the pain that it caused to the people that lived there and to the people that are descendants of the people that were affected by those crimes.
Yes, definitely. There were crimes against those people. It's horrific stuff. And instead of teaching that stuff, they go into how in World War II America joined the world and won the war.
Yeah, we won the war. We're the good guys, right?
We're the good guys, yeah. Or World War I, we went in, got our 12 points. Wilson or whatever. It's I really see this in America in the education system is that there's teachers who are in there for promoting a specific agenda for a purpose of their own demise, right? Their own I don't want to call it agenda, but it's kind of like an agenda where they want to. And I saw this in my economics class under a teacher named Miss Knopf, who I think is reprehensible. Basically, what she was teaching is equity and how equity is the end-all, be-all. And once we achieve equity, we'll achieve enlightenment. And the world will be a much better place and all this stuff. And I would poke holes in her theory in class, but she would always dismiss me. And then after class, I would go up and talk to her, and she would talk out of her ass. And she was very incoherent in her speech. Look, and she's one of those teachers that's been teaching for like 30 years and is tenured and is going to be like a terrible teacher for maybe another 10.
Yeah.
And look, the education system in America is so corrupt and it's so bad. Like it's just awful.
Yeah.
Based off property tax in certain areas, some schools get better funding than other schools. It's not very universalized. There's no broad spectrum across the United States that this is how schools should be run. So you end up having schools in California much better than schools in Mississippi. I don't know, man. It's a big problem.
Yeah, it's a big problem, and I feel like, if we want to improve our society as a whole, it starts with educating kids, right? And there are certain ideas that are curtailed by school boards and the school system as a whole, right? I mean, individual teachers do have their individual agendas that they want to teach and that they want to imprint on their students. However, I feel like there is not a broad spectrum of agendas that can be promoted. I mean, if I became a teacher, let's say, hypothetically, right? I'm not going to.
They don't pay
I've
well.
done that, right? I taught
Yeah, you
English
taught-
in China,
yeah, you
and
taught English in China.
not my thing. Although it was fun. It was it felt really it felt good to teach kids English, and I felt like after that experience, I have so much more sympathy for teachers, right? It really is hard to prepare a lesson and craft books and worksheets for the specific purpose of imprinting a certain thing, right? It's really hard, and I think that we should give teachers some sympathy,
especially with the
right?
language barrier too, right?
Yeah,
You spoke in
I
Chinese
mean,
when you
I
were
spoke Chinese with them, so it wasn't too hard. I could switch back and forth.
Right.
But I don't know what I was saying. Yeah, so if I was a history teacher and I wanted to give a Marxist interpretation of history, right, by ignoring the sort of the great man narrative of history,
Sure,
that
and only talk about like power struggles. or
right,
something.
power struggles and class struggles, and that is the basis of history, right? Is the material wealth of various groups. There's always been disparity there, and that that disparity is what is the root of conflict, and I don't know. I'm giving a bad interpretation of Marxist history here,
Sure,
but
yeah, I get your point.
if I wanted to teach that class in that way, I can almost guarantee I would get a talk from the principal and the administration and the school board, and I'd get fired, right?
I don't know, man. It's pretty hard to fire tenured professors.
I wouldn't
or
get
tenured
tenured
teachers.
though, right? I would have
If you're like a new teacher. or
if I was a
whatever.
new teacher, and that's what I brought to the class, right?
Well, I don't think classrooms are super well monitored anymore.
Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, I do feel like word does get up to the administration. And
well, what do you think's happening in colleges now? Because it really seems like people are, really upset and kind of pissed off at the fact that, like, I don't know. It's really hard to say.
yeah,
Colleges now seem to be completely liberalized.
Mhm.
Is that a word? Liberalized?
you just call it left wing.
Left
I
wing.
mean, yeah.
Sure. They seem to be entirely left wing. There seems to be a real lack of, conservative voice in the education system.
Mhm.
And also, there's like this huge movement of political correctness going on
Mhm.
with these colleges, having safe spaces and all that stuff. I don't know if you've heard much about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really overblown, right?
You think so?
I think that people on the internet, right-wing folks on the internet, like, Jordan Peterson and Milo Yiannopoulos or, Caitlin Bennett or any other person, they want to capitalize on the alienation that right-wing white males feel in our society today, and so they accentuate problems that aren't really that big.
Well, I think Jordan Peterson's like the prominent figure with all this stuff,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And he's not right wing. He's never claimed to be. He's more.
I feel like he's pretty right-wing.
No, he's left wing, really.
Really?
Yeah,
How?
he's very progressive.
In what ways?
Well, he used to work for a socialist party in Sweden.
all right.
Yeah.
I feel like the philosophy that he espouses is uber Christian Orthodox in a way. I mean, he's
Oh yeah, it's definitely
he's-
Christian Orthodox.
he
There's so much.
he opposes like premarital sex. He talks about how cultural Marxism is
Well, he's a
bane
psychologist,
to
right?
the Western society, and I don't know. He's a psychologist by trade, but he's found that he can capitalize on commenting on the social reality of Canada and America, and he found that there is a large audience for disenfranchised young white males on the internet that want to have their opinions validated.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily that, because there's definitely people of color who are going to his debates and who support him substantially, and most of his his self-authoring program that he always promotes, right?
I don't.
Well, he basically has this self-authoring program where basically it targets young men. Again, well, it wasn't made for young men, but he says it worked out like that. That are made to help people who are kind of disenfranchised in universities, and also people who just don't have really structure to their life. What I really think Jordan Peterson cares about is individual responsibility, and he's heavily influenced by Fyodor Dostoevsky, which I gave you that book by whatever. And basically, what he talks about is how everyone has to bear a cross, right? He has that Christian influence, and sacrifice their pleasures for personal responsibility, because meaning in life is found in having responsibility. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad message at all, and I don't think it's wrong at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can cherry pick his arguments, right? Because he does stand for a lot of things, right? And my biggest gripe with him is the term cultural Marxism, right? Which he basically just uses the term Marxism to smear anything that he doesn't like, right? He thinks that the proliferation of sex positivity and being the society being okay with premarital sex is a result of Marxism, which I feel like is completely disingenuous, and Marx really had nothing to say about sex. All he talked about was class.
Well, yeah, I think
and economics.
Sure, but I mean, he really what the reason why he rose to prominence, which is he's kind of an anomaly in this case, is that he talked about how Bill C something
in Toronto, right?
Toronto, yeah, it was trying to. This is kind of a boring topic.
No, it's okay. Let's talk about it.
You want to talk about it? Okay. But basically, there was a bill that was passed. Well, that was trying to be passed. I don't know the specifics, but basically, what it was talking about was how there is mandatory use of language when referring to transgender people, and he said it was the first time in English common law that anyone had made compelled speech laws, and he really opposed that because there in America we can say whatever we want, right? And there's no consequences to us saying what we think and what we want to think.
Well, there are.
Yeah, okay, you got me there.
Yeah, there are consequences. You can say what you
consequences,
want,
but there are going to be consequences.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah,
as there should be. I feel like if you say something reprehensible, there should be consequences to it.
Yeah, but you can have any opinion you want. Can I say that?
Yeah, I think that you can hold any opinion you want, but I think that if a majority of society thinks that opinion is reprehensible, you should suffer those consequences. If you have a board of directors at a large company that says that black people are less than white people, right? Sure, that's their opinion, right? But I think that there should be consequences to that. If the public at large demands that they resign, that should be the consequence for voicing that opinion. If you know that you have reprehensible opinions that do not conform with the general opinion in society, you should know and recognize the consequences of stating those opinions.
Yeah, I shouldn't say there is no consequences because there's definitely consequences.
There are consequences.
There's definitely consequences, but the ability to have your speech the way you want to speak, right? I think that is what he's really getting to, because I mean he's super influenced by Alexander Solzhenitsyn and George Orwell and those communist writers who basically said when a country decides to try and take away your speech privileges and how you speak, then that's when the country starts to fall apart, because then everything is governed by the state and you can't think freely about how you want to express yourself or whatever,
Yeah.
Or speak the truth rather. When you have commanded language where you can't say things, then that means you can't speak what is true, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk about the specific issue that he was opposing.
Bill
right?
C-16, right?
Yeah. So it basically would have made it. I don't think there was jail time attached to it. Right, you couldn't get sent to jail for misgendering a trans person or a non-binary person. I think it would have been more like a ticket, something like that. I'm not sure.
I was pretty sure. I was under the impression that you could get jail time for it.
Really, I'm not sure about the specifics of it. Right, but let's talk about more broadly. The misgendering of trans people. Right, Jordan Peterson is a hardliner. On the issue of gender, right? He believes that you should remain in the box that you were born in, right? If you were born with male genitalia, then you should be referred to as he, him for the rest of your life, and there's no crossing that line, right? But I think
not necessarily, because he was asked the question. This transgender person asked him a question on, I believe, a news site, and he was a transgender she, and the guy said, what would you refer to her in the classroom? And he said, I would call her she. So I mean, I don't know.
Well, I think the stipulation with that is that in the hypothetical of her being his
In the
student,
classroom,
right?
sure.
But in that debate where he famously went up and spoke at the Toronto City Council or whatever, he misgendered the person that he was debating against, right? He called the transgender woman a he, right? Which really is what kind of put fuel to the fire of the controversy over him, right? Where right wing people are like, yeah, she is a he. He's born with a dick, right? And the trans ally said, listen, that's really offensive. A person's gender identity is up for them to decide, and it can be it's an incredibly personal, individual thing, and you should have the choice in that matter, and that by misgendering a person like that, you are curtailing on their individuality,
Sure.
and their ability to choose their gender expression, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it really comes down to is gender malleable, right? Like that's the number one question: is gender malleable? If that's the case, then that means that all he's are she's and all she's are he's, right?
Well, I think that there's an important distinction to draw. Now, obviously, neither of us are very well versed in this topic
No.
about gender identity or any of
No.
those things, but
I've just seen Ben Shapiro,
yeah,
killing libtards.
yeah,
or whatever.
exactly. That feminist gets roasted. Yeah, but I think that there's an important distinction to draw between biological sex, right, your chromosomes, and gender, right? Because there are a lot of things that are associated with gender that are human constructions, right? I mean, if you think of a lumberjack, in your head right now, I guarantee it's a man with a beard.
Yeah,
right?
it's a man with a beard.
Right.
Wearing a checkered shirt.
Yeah, exactly. Axe over his shoulder. Right.
Yep.
Or if you think of a person in a dress, your immediate thought is a woman, right?
Yep.
And those aren't things that are concrete or attached to biological sex, right? Now those are bad examples, right? There's a myriad of things that are associated with gender, right? Motherhood is associated with women, and war and aggression is associated with men. There's a million things that society has decided this is male and this is female, and certain people feel that the traditional associations with their born gender are not the ones that they want to feel associated with. Now, this is I feel like I'm butchering this explanation of trans people, but certain people feel that they were born in the wrong body, right? And I feel like it's their personal choice to express their gender identity as they choose, right? If a person does not feel wholly male or wholly female, they should have the freedom to express that desire and choose to be a non-binary person. Be referred to by the pronouns they them. Right.
Okay.
I know plenty of people that fall into that category. And and that by calling a non-binary person he or she, I'm infringing upon their individual interpretation of how they want to be seen and how they want to live in this world.
Yeah. Okay.
So I feel like it is. At the end of the day, a discussion over personal rights, right? And if a person wants to identify as whatever gender, whatever pronouns that they want, that's their choice, and that by infringing on that choice, I am infringing on their freedom and their individuality and offending them for nothing but my own personal idea of what a man or a woman should be.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a really complicated issue.
Yeah.
My kind of perspective on this whole transgendered kind of movement that's going on in society where people are, changing genders. Well, one thing to speak of first off is how there's a much higher rate of suicide between people who are transgender. Like the suicides rate of people who are transgender is crazy compared to the general population. And so we could say that people who are transgender are at a higher risk of suicide, probably because they're genuinely unhappy, right? And I don't think it's very far stretched to say that because more people who are transgender are killing themselves, that means they're not comfortable anywhere. They're not comfortable in the he or she or whatever the other pronouns are. So I don't think, first off, that just because a person changes their gender identity will make them happier, right? Because the research on that is pretty clear. It doesn't. So that's number one. Then I would say, secondly, that
I'll debate that premise, but continue. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And secondly, it also, we can't ignore biological factors. And when you have, transgender people, what you're basically saying is I'm ignoring the biological factors, because now I'm referring to this person as a she, although they are not a she by birth, and that there are biological factors that really show the man, right? For instance, there's a person, I think it was like Fallon Fox or something like that, who went, maybe that's a wrong name, I don't know, it was some UFC fighter who was a man and then changed to a woman and just beat the shit out of like every woman and broke all the records. And one woman, like, she was severely hospitalized because like, that's a man, that she has the biological semblance of a man. And I don't think that's very good that these people can go to the opposite genders, whatever, and just start destroying and killing all the records, because men are naturally stronger than women, right? People understand that. Well, maybe they don't. When you have a bell curve, for instance, there's people at the low extremes and there's people at the high extremes. I wish I had a pen and paper, people could see this, but when you draw a bell curve, and then you draw a bell curve slightly to the right of the first bell curve, then the extremes of the second bell curve are much higher than the other side. So I think there's a statistic that says if you chose out of the population 100 women and 100 men, 60% of the time, the more aggressive person will be men, 60% of the time. And if you chose, 100 women, 40% of the women would be more aggressive than the man, right? So you'd be right 40% of the time. But the second part to that is out of those 60% that are men, there's hyper aggressive men, right? So the extreme of hyper aggressive men is much more than the hyper aggressive women, right? So there are serious biological factors at play here. Like, and when you say that, okay, gender is fluid and that anyone can be any gender they want, then what ends up happening is people become disillusioned by the biological factors themselves. Maybe it's not a very good point, but I think it's important to understand that when Ben Shapiro always likes to say, I have to pretend that you're a male. Or I have to pretend you're a female, right? And I don't know if that's necessarily the best way of putting it, but what you're doing is somewhat distorting the truth to fit a person's gender, perception.
Yeah. So I'll talk about the first point, right? How you say that transgender people have a higher rate of suicide than the general population. So I read an interesting article on this, and it basically it detailed so gender dysphoria, right? When you don't feel your personal gender identity doesn't match up with your biological identity. That is it's a horrible thing to deal with, right? And it's something that is ingrained in a person, right? And it's not something that can be cured by conversion therapy or anything like that. It's not like you can take pills to get rid of your gender dysphoria, right? And I'm lucky enough that my gender identity lines up with my biological identity, right? But there are a significant amount of people whose don't, right? And when you look at the suicide rates of transgender people, the suicide rates of pre-transition people with gender dysphoria are significantly higher than those post-transition. So when you look at gender dysphoria as a mental problem, right, which I don't mean to use derogatorily, right? It's, plenty of people have mental problems and they should not be, criticized or discriminated against because of them. But if you look at it as a problem for that individual, transitioning is the most effective way to curtail that, right? And I think that, so if if your gender identity doesn't match up with your biological identity, that's an issue, right? And you'll never be able to change your chromosomal makeup, right? But by transitioning outwardly to the gender that you feel matches up most with your personal gender identity, it significantly reduces the effects of gender dysphoria, right? Because by forcing a person to basically live in a prison basically that they don't feel matches up with their personal identity, you accentuate the problem of gender dysphoria, right? If you say, listen, I know you don't feel like a man, right, but you have to stay a man. You're not allowed to transition. You're not allowed to do things that you feel match up with your gender identity.
Eric, I don't feel like this is a very good point. I don't want to cut you off, but I think it's very important that we understand that if a person has gender dysphoria, then we can characterize that as an illness. Right?
Yeah. So what's the best way to treat that illness?
The best way to treat that illness is by not allowing them to pretend they don't have the illness in the first place. Because if a person's schizophrenic, okay, if a person's schizophrenic, then we're not going to pretend that they actually are seeing their long lost uncle everywhere, and that they're actually, whatever happens with people who are schizophrenic, that they're actually hearing things, that things that they perceive as not really there are actually there, because that would be a huge grave disservice to them, because they're not actually there, right? And so just saying that because they have this gender dysphoria, they should transition, that's their treatment, is not a valid argument at all. Because
why?
It's not valid because it's not logical.
Why? I feel like it is the most effective treatment of that illness, right?
This is a real hard topic to talk about.
You can't get rid of it, right? It's not like you can take pills. It's not like society can say, shut up, that's not a problem. Be quiet. Stop whining, right? That's not effective. In fact, that accentuates the problem.
Sure.
Right?
But something has to be, if something is true, right, then we must follow the truth. Because I hold truth as the number one thing to follow, because the truth is the most important thing, right? And to say that a person who feels that they shouldn't be a man wants to become a woman, right? Well, that's not necessarily true, because the biological factors have already been determined, right? And so it's not necessarily about a cure for those people, that them moving to this this somewhat of a lie of a state of mind, which when we say, oh, okay, well, we all have to say that this person is now a man, that she was a woman, but now she's a man, right? That means that I have to lie to believe that, because I can't accept the fact that anyone who, is born sexually with that, that they are a man can ultimately become a woman at any time, because the biological factors are already determined.
Yeah, but can we agree that there is a distinction between biological gender and societal gender, right?
I can agree that they work together.
Yeah, I mean, there is correlation, right? There are biological factors that influence the way either gender is viewed in society.
Well, we can also say that the majority of the population believes that your gender is your biological birth, right? You were born a man, therefore I can say he.
Yeah, but I think that, sure, there are people that are transphobic in society, right? But I think that as a whole, if we want to, respect an individual's individuality and their expression, and we want to make them happy, right? Golden rule: do others as you want them to do unto you, right? It doesn't matter, what is the truth or what is not. I think that, if you want to make trans people feel accepted and feel happy, right, you need to treat them as they want to be treated.
Well, I think you're contradicting yourself, because one of your earlier points about China was that Mao Zedong came in and said, that you guys are holding on to these folklore traditions of, you know, what I forgot the ones that you brought up.
They were bullshit. I kind of just pulled them out of my ass.
Okay, but yeah, you know those, and this is across societies as well. Like the Mayans would like drink penis blood and all this stuff, or smoke penis blood.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah,
and so we go in and we say, hey, you guys are messed up. Like you can't kill little children and that are, you know, whatever, and sacrifice them to the gods all the time. That's not good. That's not true. Well, I think that parallels this argument, because then you're saying that the truth doesn't matter. It's up to individual perception, right? Well, the earlier point that it was necessary for these people to change their beliefs, and it was necessary for people to come in and say, you guys are not doing what is true. Well, you know, if you follow that line of thinking, then what we should have done is we should have just let those people believe their false truths. Yeah,
but I mean, I think that there's such a significant difference between an individual's gender identity and the cultural practices of a group of people, right? I think that if you look at,
I'm not talking about that.
Yeah.
All I'm talking about is like the logic. I'm talking about the reasoning.
Yeah, but I think that the effect of misgendering and forcing a person who has gender dysphoria into a box that they don't want to be in, right, has a horrible, horrible effect on those people, right? And I think that we should be compassionate and sympathetic and do what is best for that person, right? And what is best for that person is to change their gender identity to match up with their internal gender identity. Right? If we want to be sympathetic and compassionate and we want to do what is best for these people, right? We want to help them deal with their gender dysphoria. The best way to do that is by recognizing their individual gender identity.
Well, okay, let me bring up an example. So I think I brought this example up previously too, that the happiness of one person is less than the truth of that person, right? So what I mean is, when you have let's say you're a father of a child, I think I brought this point up earlier, when you're a father of a child and your child only likes to eat candy all the time, but it makes them happy, when the father at one point must say to their child, you can't eat candy all the time, you need to eat healthy foods, because otherwise you're going to be fat, right? I think this is applicable, because what you're saying is that the happiness of the individual supersedes the truth of the situation.
I don't think that there's, like, saying that because one was born a certain gender, you must remain in that box of gender for the rest of your life isn't necessarily a truth. I think that is an assumed truth based on the, you know, societal expectations of Western civilization.
Okay, but earlier, I remember earlier in another podcast you had mentioned that if a society sees that another person isn't pulling their weight, then they get ostracized, right? And so we could say that since this person isn't following the standards that have been set by society, then they should be ostracized as well.
No, I think that that's completely different, right? I think that it's one thing if a person in a workspace or community isn't doing the same level of work as the rest of the individuals, right? That's one particular case that can be changed and adjusted. That person can be made to work more, right? And meet the standards set by society. However, gender identity isn't a thing that can be changed, right? You can't berate and lecture people with gender dysphoria enough to make them change, right?
I'm not saying you should. I'm simply saying that I can't accept the first premise that gender identity should be something fluid and that it shouldn't be accepted as true. I feel like the biological factors determine the gender identity. I don't know if gender identity is even I don't even think it exists. I feel like the biological factors it is all encompassing of gender identity. And if you deny the biological factors, then you deny biology altogether. That because here's the logical follow to saying that gender identity is something fluid and it can change. The logical follow is, well, there are no biological differences between men and women, and that's obviously not true. That there are definitely biological factors that determine a man and a woman. For instance, bone structure. One person has a dick, another has a vagina. Like there are biological factors that determine whether a person's a he or she.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should just throw those out the window because they're important.
And I'm not advocating for that. I don't think that we should all become non-binary.
Yeah, but
right?
it logically follows that if you say gender identity is fluid, then
for the individual,
right? So that means the individual determines the truth of biology
for themselves.
No, not necessarily, because it trickles around, Eric. If one person says that my gender identity, I determine my gender identity, determine my sexual orientation or whatever, then it logically follows that anyone can do that. And if anyone can do that, then biology is out of the window.
I don't
if something is true, then it has to be true across all spectrums.
Yeah. I think we can recognize that having an XY chromosome and an XX chromosome, there are differences there, right? But those differences don't need to determine how a person acts in society, right? I think that if we want to support individual freedom, individual liberty, and strive towards the goal of making every person in our society as happy as they could be, then we need to recognize that there are people whose biological gender does not match up with their gender identity, right? And that's a problem, not a problem, but that is an issue that is present in all societies, right? Can we agree on that premise?
Yeah.
Gender dysphoria isn't caused by watching cartoons or any sort of anything based on your nurture, right? That isn't a
It's purely biological. Well, there's actually recent studies that are coming out that it's not biological. That it's cultural.
So why are there transgender people in the first place? Because there were now transgender people are relatively accepted as a whole, right? We recognize that we should not persecute them.
Yeah, I don't think we should either,
right? But that was not the case 100 years ago, right? There were people that were transgender that fought against societal expectations, that pushed against it, what society accepts as a whole in order to be happier, right? Why would a person choose to do that when it would cause them to be ostracized from society?
Well, I don't know, because I really don't know, but it doesn't necessarily matter because they exist now, right?
Yeah.
So whether the person decides or it's biologically predetermined doesn't matter. It only matters about the modern implications today. And I think what we're really getting at is, should we value the truth of the society over the happiness of the individual, right? And I think the truth of society supersedes the happiness of the individual.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can still recognize that there are biological differences between men and women, right? While still making transgender or non-binary people feel happy and feel comfortable, right? It does, just because there are trans people and we refer to them by the gender and the pronouns that they prefer, does not mean that we have to just throw all biology out the window. They can coexist peacefully, right?
But it doesn't make sense. Like it doesn't make sense to me that you can have both.
Why not? I mean, I
feel like you can have both, because if you say that gender identity is fluid and that anyone who thinks that they want to be a man can become a man, or a man can become a woman at any time, that means biology doesn't matter.
Well,
because at that point,
there's a difference between
social. I know what you're about to say.
Outward gender,
Yep.
right? How you dress, how you look, how your body is shaped, and the chromosomal makeup of a person.
Yeah, but
right?
the different. Yeah, okay, and how it's accepted within the society itself, right? So the difference is this: that one person, although they are not biologically a man, can be a man at any point because that's what they feel comfortable with. But if you're saying that that's what they feel comfortable with, then what you're doing is you're sacrificing the biological truths for a almost expedient reward of the individual at the moment.
Yeah.
You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
But I feel like we're kind of going. We're being a little bit redundant,
circles, right? Yeah. But I think that because I refer to a transgender man as he, him, right? Because that's what he wants, and I want to make him happy, does not mean that I recognize that transgender man, I'm not pretending that man has the genetic makeup of a man, right? I know that there's a distinction there, right? If you are transgender, that means that your chromosome makeup does not align with your outward gender identity, right?
Okay.
And that difference can exist,
Okay.
right? We just by saying that we refer to transgender men as he, him, right? That is a language choice, right, that we make in order to make people feel accepted.
But
and
it's a
happy.
self-contradiction.
Mhm.
It's cognitive dissonance if you do that.
I mean, I see what you're saying, right? That we can only refer to people with the X gender as he, him, right? And we can only refer to the people with the XY chromosomes as she, her. But that's a language choice, right? That's a choice.
Well, language reflects our thoughts.
Yeah.
And so if you are saying that it's purely a language choice, in that, who cares whether or not I actually refer to them as he, her, or whatever, or Caesar, or whatever it is. It is cognitive dissonance to say that because a person chooses to express themselves as he, her, or whatever, that it must be completely followed, because they're not a he, her, because deep down we actually know that person was born with a penis, and to say that this person is now I should refer to them as her, is not true, because they aren't her, they are he. And I don't believe that us being expedient towards that person saying, okay, whatever, I'll refer to them as her, because that's what they choose. I don't think that's a good place, because what you end up doing is you end up sacrificing the truth for that person's temporary happiness. And when you sacrifice the truth for temporary happiness, bad things happen.
Yeah.
Bad things happen.
But that truth is based on, what you're calling truth.
Yeah, biology. I mean, I feel like biology
it's based on the fact that XX, people with the XX chromosomes, have to be called he, him, and people with the XY chromosomes have to be called she, her.
No,
right?
that's not what I'm trying to say.
That's not a concrete truth, right?
Well,
that's
it is a concrete truth that XX equals woman and XY equals man, right?
I think we might have this switched around. To be
I don't
honest.
know. I can't remember.
You guys
but
know what
whatever.
I mean. Yeah.
You guys know. A man, we know that a person born with a penis is a man by its nature, right? And we know that a woman, or the vagina, is a woman by its nature, right? And so that's the only truth that I'm saying is true. I'm not necessarily saying that the way a person expresses themselves is true, because obviously we have transgender people, right? What I'm saying purely is that biology, as a science, has determined that there are two genders, male and female, that people are born with. Can we agree on that premise?
Yes.
Therefore, that should be the way that the person is identified in society, is by the only two biological determined things by biology. Because we can agree on the premise that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. Therefore, they should be referred to as a man and they should be referred to as a woman, despite them not feeling comfortable in their body, right? Because it's true either way. And I don't believe that we should sacrifice these truths of biology in order to fit the mold of a person's individual interpretation.
Yeah, but do you see how that can have such a negative effect?
It can have a negative effect.
Right? People kill themselves, bro.
Yeah. It can have a negative effect.
Right,
But you're still sacrificing the truth if you choose to
it's not the
change
truth,
your language.
Bro.
It's, okay, but we
X
already
equals
agreed
he,
and
XY equals her. That's a social construct. Right?
Okay.
Right? We've
we
agreed
can-
that he refers to men.
Yes.
And she refers to women. Right? But that's not written in any biological Bible. Right?
Well, it's written.
That's just how we refer to people. Right? So
Well,
it's a human interpretation of biology. Right? Which and any human
I feel like we're hitting
interpretation.
a brick wall here.
Yeah.
I feel like we're hitting a brick wall.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think we both clearly stated our points. And I think we're just gonna have a disagreement on this.
Yeah.
And I mean, I wish we could find an answer.
Yeah.
But I have to hold on to to what I believe is true, which is that biology is determined at birth by many factors, bone structure, whatever. and that is a man. That for all other animals, there's two categories, male or female, and that has been how we determine what a male and what a female is, right? And with humans, it is the exact same thing, because once you try and refer to a person as whatever they feel like they want, then what you're doing is you're sacrificing all of biology.
It's not all of biology, bro. It's a very specific leap, right? I don't know. Yeah, like we said, we're talking in circles. We're
talking in circles, but
right.
Okay.
I just think that the way we refer to people, the pronouns that we use, is not a truth, right? It's not a truth, right? We use they, them when we don't know the gender, right? How is that cashier? I don't know. They were fine, right? That's the way we refer to people when we don't want to acknowledge their gender, right? Those are all social constructs that are a result of, the long history of language, right? And I think that we can shift. Language does shift. It changes all the time, right? We use slang, we make up new words, we shift our grammar, right, as society changes. And I think that making a change in our language in order to make people feel happy and accepted and stop killing themselves is it's not a sacrifice at all, really. I was going to say it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make, but it's not. It's not a sacrifice at all.
It's just because it's I want to go back into it. But I guess let's just leave the topic.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about next?
I don't know, bro. I'm riled up.
Me too, man. I feel like we have had like really little like big disagreements. And I feel like that's one of the big disagreements.
Yeah, I don't know. I just like, to me, like, to give personal anecdotes here. Like when I went to Bard College at Simon's Rock, I went there for a semester. I really became friends with transgender and non-binary people for the first time, right? Here in Scripps Ranch, there's not many, right? I know some of them, right? But I certainly wouldn't consider myself friends with them,
sure.
Right? But when I went to Bard College at Simon's Rock, I realized how intensely personal a person's gender identity is, and how offensive it can be to misgender a person. And I feel like calling someone by the pronouns that they prefer is just a way. It's courtesy, right? And I really I don't give a shit about what gender that person was born as, because it has no effect on how I converse with them.
Yeah. Well.
And by referring to them by the pronouns that they use or they prefer to use, I'm just making them feel better as a person. And that's a thing that I want to strive to do. Golden rule. I would, if I had gender dysphoria and I was transgender, I would want people to refer to me as the pronouns that I would prefer to use. And I could frankly give a shit about the biological truth of the whole nature, right? Because I recognize there is biological difference between men and women, right? But that doesn't affect my conversation with this person. I just want to make them feel happy and accepted.
Yeah. But and that's a very good first-hand account. But again, like I do really believe that if we sacrifice this truth right now, that we say, okay, you know what, we'll all start believing that this person who's previously a man is now a woman, then what we end up doing is we end up moving the truth to shift our individual perspective. And when you do that, you sacrifice the truth in doing it, right? And so when we speak about a person as a male or a woman, and we say, okay, well, whatever, who cares? I mean, it's not a super big deal. It can spiral. It can become a big deal. It can become that all things that I need to speak have to be in concordance with another person's belief, and therefore I lose my individuality as a result. So them moving themselves up the hierarchy, we could say, by having this compelled speech ultimately lowers me, because now I have to think and I have to speak the way they want me to think.
All right, good. I think those are good concluding statements.
Good concluding statements.
I won't. Let's not talk about it anymore. Let's move on. I don't know. What's something we can agree on, bro? You want to shit on Mormons again?
Shit on Mike Bloomberg?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know.
Excuse me.
I don't necessarily want to get back
Excuse
into religion, but I have some things that I want to ask you about.
Sure.
What is so fundamentally wrong about Protestantism? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like
Definitely.
you've sort of referred to Protestants as heretics and not real
Yeah.
Christians and all that sort of
they are
stuff. And I want to get into why that is. Right?
Yeah.
Why it is necessary for someone to be under the umbrella of the Catholic Church to follow Jesus' teachings.
Yeah. Well, there's a part in the Bible written by Paul the Apostle that says, "Faith without works is dead." Right? Faith without works is dead. What that means is you need to have faith, and you need to have your life that is representing that faith, right? I need to live according to how Jesus Christ taught. And if you don't do that, then it's dead. That means you're not going to heaven. Faith without works is dead. Protestantism believes that if I call down Jesus and I say, I want you to be my personal Lord and Savior, right? That I'm saved. That merely all I need to do is to say, Jesus, I believe in you. Let me go to heaven. And that is completely and utterly wrong. It is a strict contradiction from many parts of the Bible.
Yeah.
Right? And to say that I'm saved by my faith alone is utterly wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think
that's the short answer. I can go into a long answer too.
Yeah. Well, so I think that certain Protestant groups might believe that, right? Evangelical Christians here in America might believe that simply by accepting Jesus, you get into heaven, right? Jeffrey Dahmer in jail might, look up at the skies, I love you, Jesus, and that gets him right into heaven, even though they ate a bunch of people. I think that Protestantism is a diverse group of doctrines, right? I mean, I think that I went to I've gone to a series of Protestant churches growing up, and some of them are relatively traditional, right? Like in Sweden, the state church is a Lutheran church, right? Which really is not that far from Catholicism. It's it was the original branch off from Catholicism.
Yeah,
following the teachings of
Martin Luther.
Martin Luther, right? And they are relatively traditional, and I think that they don't really believe that you can just accept Jesus and get into heaven. I think that
it's still an essential part of their doctrine. It still is. It's
still a part of the doctrine, but they still necessitate and require putting work into your faith and living your life that in a way that reflects Jesus' teachings, right?
Yeah, I have an uncle he's the pastor. I think that's the right word. He's the pastor of a Lutheran church, big Lutheran church too, and he is unbelievably well versed in theology in general. Like, he's a very, very smart guy, very charismatic, very good guy. But he doesn't believe in the universality of the church, which is a central doctrine of the church. That we believe that Peter, and I keep going back to this. Uh-oh. Technical difficulties.
We got it.
We're good. That Peter, all his descendants, established the line of popes that had a direct relationship with Jesus Christ. And they don't have that central authority figure. And when you have these different sects of Protestantism, and it's all up to individual interpretations of the Bible, then nothing is true. Because when people decide individually, these are the truths of the Bible, then no one's certain what it is. And all it does is it causes confusion, right? Which is why when Martin Luther split off, he had an instant church, right? There was a lot of people who wanted to join him because this individual interpretation fits my mold of Christianity. But when you say it fits my mold of Christianity, what you're saying is I can't accept all the truths of the Catholic Church because they're hard to teach. And this person says he has these truths and they're easy to follow, therefore I'm good, right? That's the central problem with Protestantism is what happens is you separate from the Catholic Church and you create your own truth through a fallible doctrine that isn't given from Jesus Christ himself. Yeah. Which Catholicism is true because it was given from Jesus Christ himself, an established church given to Peter. So,
well, I don't know. I feel like any doctrine that is established by humans is inherently not 100% absolutely true, right? Can we agree on that premise?
I can agree on the premise, and which is why I would say the Catholic Church is the anomaly in this, is because we believe that the people who wrote the Bible and the people who are set as the Pope are given power through the Holy Spirit, which is Jesus Christ, and it's the love between the God and God and the Son. It's the love between them which creates the Holy Spirit, which speaks truth, and I was recently confirmed, and confirmation is the idea that you are given the Holy Spirit to help you live your life according to Jesus. So there's a very important part in first Acts, second Acts, which is Acts of the Apostles, is basically after Jesus has been ascended into heaven. He promises the Holy Spirit to these apostles. And there's a passage where the Holy Spirit descends on the 12 apostles in a room in Jerusalem and fills them with the Holy Spirit. Right? So that's why we believe that people are in the Catholic Church, they're not fallible. Well, the original 12 who taught Jesus' life were not fallible. Well, I shouldn't say they weren't fallible. That's wrong. They were filled with the Holy Spirit, so they spoke truth.
Well, so don't you? I mean, I feel like that's sort of a self-confirming truth. You know what I mean? Like saying, well, my doctrine's right because God tells me it's right, right? And our guys, God speaks through them, not your guys though, right? Don't you think that can be applied to any religion, right? Where an Anglican church says, well, the Holy Spirit spoke through Henry VIII when he decided to split off the English church from the Catholic Church and form the Anglican Church. I feel like it's you gotta use Occam's razor, right? Like you can't prove that the Holy Spirit speaks through the Pope, right? That's a leap of faith, right, in Catholicism, right? And therefore you can apply that to any sort of religious speaker. The Holy Spirit spoke through Martin Luther when he decided to put his 99 Theses on the wall of a church, right? Therefore, everything he said was correct, right?
Which
the
is why
the Holy Spirit spoke
I keep
through
going
him,
back
right?
to this, but it's so important. Which is why the direct lineage from Peter is super important, because then we know that all the popes subsequent had a connection with Jesus Christ, right? So Peter, after he died, they elected a pope that was the successor of Peter, and it's been like that for 2020 years, right? So that's why the See of Peter is super important. It's an unbroken lineage to Peter, to Jesus Christ, right? So there's that direct connection. Other religions, other Protestant religions don't have that, and you're right. I don't know if it necessarily be a leap of faith, but it's kind of a
self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Yeah.
Self-confirming statement.
Yeah, definitely. But I don't think that you can logically prove that there is an unbroken lineage, right?
No, you can prove it. Yeah, there's documents that say this is the next elected pope.
Right. So
we can take that all the way down. We can trace it all the way down. There's a church.
I mean, it's the same position in the same institution, right? But that doesn't necessarily, confirm that imply. It doesn't imply. I mean, the way you're saying it, it does imply that the Holy Spirit speaks through every one of these popes, consecutively. But I feel like that is a part of Catholic doctrine that was created in order to enforce the authority of the Catholic Church. That's saying, listen, you got to listen to the Pope because he was in the lineage of all the other popes, which goes directly back to Peter. I feel like if we want to use intellectual rigor, right, it's sort of impossible to prove that there is a direct lineage of the Holy Spirit, passing from one pope to the next. You can refer back to Catholic doctrine and parts of the Bible, but I feel like using.
Well, I'm not saying. First off, I'm not saying all popes are they only speak the truth. Like that is a completely dumb statement for me to say. Yeah. So first off, I'm not saying that all popes are necessarily have done all good things and that everything they do, everything they touch is just perfect. I'm not saying that. There was actually a point in time when we had 3 popes at once.
Yeah, there's one in Avignon and one in Rome and one in Constantinople. Yeah.
And so there's been some problems with the Catholic Church, and I'm not necessarily saying that. Yeah, again, I'm not saying that all popes are completely infallible. Look, and I don't really want to get into this because there is canon law that is established and studied by people for like their entire lives, that all they do is figure out how the Catholic Church hierarchy system is supposed to work, and how does a pope speak infallibly. And I am probably the least educated person on this ever.
Yeah.
So
should we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think we should wrap it up.
Yeah, well, it's been a good podcast. Good talking with you, Gabe.
As always,
yeah.
Greg. I think we had our disagreements, but I think
but we agreed on plenty of things.
Oh, yeah.
And just know that we come away from this as good friends.
Oh, yeah, always.
You know, these are little squabbles, but at the end of the day, we get
Look,
buddies.
I see all of our debates. I see them as very Socratic.
Very Socratic.
We're trying to find out what is true.
Find the truth and strengthen our own beliefs.
Exactly.
Through questioning and through,
and
intellectual rigor. It's tough.
It's really tough. Like,
especially when we're talking about big issues.
Yeah.
Not stupid stuff like what's your favorite Skittle?
Yeah,
Stupid stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, it's really important that we actually have these discussions because like it really helps me actually figure out what I actually believe.
Yeah. Because when you got a bunch of thoughts just roaming around up in your head, they're not very concrete, and you might have lots of contradictions up there that you aren't aware of, and by voicing them and putting them into actual words, you're able to strengthen them.
And then you figure out like when I actually say something like, "Wow, that was like super stupid."
Yeah. Me too, bro. I said some dumb stuff on this podcast.
Me too. That's the beauty of the podcast.
Exactly.
Who's listening?
Exactly.
We're 2 hours.
2 hours in. Well, if you're listening, I appreciate you.
We love you.
We love you. We love you.
You made it this far. We love you.
Exactly.
All right. Anyways, this has been the Outlet Podcast with Gabe and Eric. Thank you for listening.
Of course.